My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. Omnigrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.
Hi, I'm Sara Gallegos, and this is My First Quilt Show. And today I'm going to show you how we're going to make the streamers quilt hanging behind me. It is a jelly roll friendly project. It's kind of a variation of a jelly roll race quilt. You may have heard of that before, or a 1600 quilt, where you take a jelly roll. This is a half jelly roll, and so you would need either two of these little half ones or a full-size jelly roll, which is quite a lot larger. And you're going to sew all of those pieces together end to end to end to end. And so you end up with like 1600 inches of fabric, which is why sometimes it's called a 1600 quilt. And it really takes up a lot of space. So I've kind of broken it down for you. This right here is a jelly roll race quilt where you've simply sewn the jelly roll strips together end to end. And they're sewn straight, where all of the seams come together. It's just a straight seam. In this quilt, I'm going to show you how we can do it at a bias, so you get an angled cut like on the streamers. And then you also have that black strip in between all of your colored strips, just to kind of break it up, and it gives you a totally different look than that scrappy look of a jelly roll race. So here I've got opened up my jelly roll strips, and you want to cut them in half before you stitch them so that you have shorter segments. And we sew them together end to end so that we get a bias seam like this. And that's the first thing that I'll show you how to do. So for this project, you need two different presser feet. For sewing these bias seams together, I like to use the standard foot that comes with the machine because I need to sew straight at an angle across my fabrics. And then when I sew everything together at the end, I like to use a 1/4 inch foot. So I'm going to start by attaching the J foot, which is my standard foot. And we want to start with two of our strips. And again, we're going to cut those in half. So I just take my scissors and go right across the fold to cut them. This helps it to look a little bit more random in color. Okay. And we'll take two of those. We want to keep them right sides together. And on the jelly roll race, you simply sew straight across the seams. You have an open seam that's nice and straight, but we're going to do a bias. So I'm going to take my two strips and put them on top of each other. So I've got a little bit of a header sticking out on each edge, and the goal is going to be to sew straight across here. So we're going to take a ruler right across the diagonal seams where they meet. So I'm aligning my ruler so that it's right at the edge where my two fabrics come together at this corner and then at this corner as well. And then you'll take your marking pen and draw a line. And you're never going to see this line in the end, so it could be any sort of a marking pen. Just want a nice line to sew, so that's good. And then we'll stick a couple pins in there just so that this does not shift as we're carrying it to the sewing machine. And again, you want to make sure that when you're stitching that you take these pins out before you get to them with your needle. Some people say that it's okay to sew over pins, but I disagree. It really is better for your machine not to do that. So again, I'm going to use just a standard foot that's going to allow me to sew straight down that line. So I'll attach that real quick. There we go. And we'll sew down the line. Okay, so we've got a pretty straight row of stitching there. Now I'll take my scissors and cut off this excess fabric. Leave yourself about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could of course do this with your rotary cutter as well. And there we have it. So then you would press that seam open and just continue stitching until you have sewn together all of those strips. Now it's going to feel like a lot of sewing, but once you get there, it makes the process of completing the quilts a lot faster. So after you've sewn together all of those bias pieces, you need to sew together your black strips. So this is a 2-inch strip. It's a little bit narrower than the jelly roll strips. And for these, because it's black, you really don't see what the seam is going to look like. So instead of bias sewing these, which takes a little bit more time, I just sewed them together with a straight stitch. So you've got nice evenly pieced pieces of your black, and you just sew those together end to end to end. So we'll sew that really quick. And that's where I'm gonna switch to my 1/4 inch foot, because I like to keep a nice consistent 1/4 inch seam. There we go. I'll stitch that real quick. And so you would sew every single black strip. You need quite a few more than this, end to end. So you get one big long strip. So once you've sewn all of those black strips together, you're gonna press your seams and make sure your strips are nice and flat. And then you're going to take all of your pieced colorful strips and sew those to the black strips. And again, just using a simple 1/4 inch seam. Now, because these are jelly rolls, they are cut with that pinked edge. And when I sew these, I just make sure that the little tips of those pinked edges are even in line with the straight edge of my black fabric. And you're just going to sew down the length. So you're gonna have a lot of fabric sitting in your lap as you're sewing these, because you have 40 jelly roll strips sewn together and a lot of black strips as well. Just adjust my fabric real quick here. Now I pressed all of my seams open when I did this, and as I get to those seams with my presser foot, the presser foot wants to flip those seams up, so it's a good time just to stop and lift your foot. This is a nice place for pivot position if you have it on your machine, and then just continue sewing so that you don't accidentally flip those seams over. It'll keep it all nice and flat. There we go. So once you've sewn that entire strip, again, you're going to take it to the iron and press it open. Now I like to press toward the darker fabric, so I pressed all of mine toward the black, and it keeps everything nice and straight and flat, and you don't have any of your black fabric peeking through the lighter pink strips of the quilt. So when you have sewn that, you end up with a huge amount of fabric. This is about half the quilt's worth. And you want to, at that point, fold it together end to end. So you're gonna stretch out that big long piece of fabric, bring the short ends together, and you just keep flipping it over on itself until you have about 16 sets. So again, this is about half of it. And at that point, you're going to cut those in half again. So I just kind of come in with my scissors in each strip at each end. And if it's not exactly the same size on each strip, because as you're folding it, you may find that one ends up a little bit shorter than another, it really is not a big deal, because after you complete the entire quilt, you're gonna square that up. I will tell you that this job is a little bit easier if you have a buddy. So when I made my quilt, I had my mom helping me, and she helped me fold all those pieces together end to end to keep it nice and straight. We were stretching it all the way across the house practically with all those rows. So again, we're just gonna keep cutting. So now you have all of these segments, and you're going to start by piecing the first one with the black side facing to your left, and then add another row in. And this is a great place for your design wall, if you have a design wall, or you can kind of lay it out on the floor or on a bed, and you're just gonna keep placing your strips next to each other, so you have a black and a color and a black and a color, and you just keep going out until you've used all of your strips. For the very last row, you'll have a color on the right side, a colored strip on the right side like this, so you just add one extra black row, and that's what frames in all of the colors of the quilt. So once you've done that, you're going to fold one on top of the other, and again, with that 1/4 inch seam, we're gonna stitch right down the line. right. And so here is the first set. So now we've got a black strip, a colored strip, a black strip, and a colored strip. And you're just going to continue building out like that until you create the entire width of the quilt top. You might have noticed that I've added an extension table to my sewing machine. With the width of this quilt, it tends to get pretty heavy, and you'll find this with any large quilt that you make. So if your machine comes with an extension table, or if you can get one for it, it's really, really handy because the length of this table kind of holds up the quilt and it helps with all of the weight. With those 1/4-inch seams, if you're getting toward the end of the quilt, if it's really heavy, it wants to kind of fall off the free arm of the machine, and the weight of it pulls your fabric edge away from the edge of your 1/4-inch foot, which tends to cause a lot of tension in your shoulders from holding all of that weight. So putting on an extension table really makes the job easier, and it makes it feel better too. I hope you've enjoyed this project. Come and see me again at my first quilt show.
My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. Omnigrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.